toxicity doesn't mean that it's lethal, right? It's just like bad.
Correct. Toxicity does not mean lethal. That's a really important distinction. That's right. What else? Toxic dose is not lethal dose. Anybody else? We're done? Okay. I'd like to tell you the story of two doctors whose last names were Lydico and Bodig. They were a big deal during World War II. They were investigating a mysterious illness on the island of Guam. Raise your hand if you've heard of Guam. The story I will tell you, you can just kind of sit back and enjoy for a few minutes. It'll become time to take notes in about 15 minutes. Please look up. That is the United States of America. That is Hawaii, which is still part of the United States of America. And then the Marshall Islands and the Mariana Islands and Guam are friendly with the United States of America. We have military bases there. Guam is really important because if you are at war with Japan, that's a long way to travel and go back. But you can stage military intervention and action pretty close to Japan if you're in Guam. Everybody good with that concept? Guam is militarily critical to the United States, especially during World War II, because we were fighting Japan. History, context, okay so far? I may continue? Guam is a Polynesian paradise. You all know about my obsession with Polynesians. What?
You didn't make a crappiest photo.
Oh,
Look at the quality.
it's like a thumbnail that I blew up to. Yeah, I don't even. Forgive me, it takes me a long time to like read stuff, and then I write a script for my lectures, and I'm like, I need photo of tropical island. And I'm like, boom. That was a little better. I don't know.
Oh my god, is that you?
Hey, if you want to modify my my slideshows, I would love it.
Well, you can actually
You could be a TA next year and spend the whole year making slideshows. Think of the glory. You can put your signature on all of them. I've had a couple of my TAs insert sneaky photos in my slideshows, and I only notice them while I'm going through it in class sometimes. And so there's like a weird digitized monkey in a forest. There's a picture of a fat cat in a slideshow about Alaska.
Baby will put this.
There you go.
It's still crappy. Look at the sky. That's still a crappy photo. Yeah, I also had to make them very low data, so I intentionally lower the quality. That's why the sky looks bad. Anyway, Guam is a beautiful Polynesian paradise with a little bit of fresh water, and so it's had humans on it for a really long time. Those humans are called the Chamorro. The Chamorro are still on Guam today. They're one of these awesome preserving history Polynesian people. The Chamorro have like children's history maintenance committee stuff. They still do like traditional dance and ceremony, and they have traditional tattoo. The Chamorro have this really badass calendar that's all based on natural events. So instead of like October, November, December, it's like the season where the Dorado jump, and then the season where the dolphin come close to shore, and the season where the tuna go deep. And like you like everything is all lined up by natural events. Like all Polynesians, the Chamorro had traditional sculpture, which they still do. Their traditional sculpture, instead of the moi on Easter Island, they make these huge pedestals with flower pots on top. And you know, they're like big, imposing structures that take community effort to move around and stuff. And so there's like a lot of, if you study Polynesia, you kind of have to study history of carving, and so there's a lot of interesting stuff about how they carve these huge flower pots on pedestals. Okay. And the Chamorro had a very natural diet. They used to do a whole bunch of fishing and eating wild fruits and stuff until they were contacted by Catholic missionaries when they started to change their clothes and they started to farm their food. So the Chamorro will still do like a traditional barbecue for like a special celebration or whatever, but the Chamorro have become like European influenced farmers today. Okay? They are especially, this photo sucks, they're especially known for growing pork. And there's an interesting story when the Americans showed up on Guam with all of their jeeps and their camo and their warships and all that stuff to set up military bases on Guam. They hired the Chamorro to grow food, because it's cheaper to have the locals make food than it is to bring the food all the way from the United States. This should be obvious, right? And the Chamorro grow pork, and the Americans are like, oh my God, bacon, I'll give you whatever you want. So the Chamorro were like making a lot of money by feeding the Americans on the base. Yeah? Everybody good with this?
Thank you.
It was known that there was a rare disease that occurred on Guam. So all the way back to 1904, there was a report of a weird illness that at the time was very rare. In 1904, there wasn't many. I want to use two big words, okay? Neurological degenerative. Neurological is nervous system. Degenerative means it gets worse and worse. Your nervous system wears out as you go over time. Everybody okay with that? Raise your hands if you know somebody with Parkinson's, or you know what disease that is, or Lou Gehrig's disease maybe. And so it's like partial, encroaching, spreading paralysis. So at first you kind of lose control of your hands, and then you lose control of your arms, and eventually you might lose control of your legs and your neck. And this starts to affect your involuntary muscles, so your breathing becomes irregular or your heart rate becomes irregular, and that's got to be a horrible way to die. Can't feed yourself, blood pressure problems, heart attack, stroke, because your heart is like irregular beat. I gotta point out that the Chamorro are like traditional Polynesians, so they're all buff and perfect. I warned you before about my fetish with the Polynesians, right? I can't not mention this. I think Polynesians are perfect. I tell a lot of Polynesian stories. If you haven't noticed, there's more coming, by the way. And I'd like to point something out, that right around a critical time for the US military, at the peak of Guam selling pork to the United States, there was a rise in this disease that became the leading cause of death, especially among young people, and it doesn't say it on the slide, but especially among men. Men aged 25 to 40 usually don't get sick with neurological degenerative diseases. That's really unique. And people on Guam were pissed. They're like, it's the Americans, they're poisoning us. It's got something to do with all of their warfare crap. And so there was a movement among the Chamorro natives to exterminate the Americans. And the Americans were all like, okay, well, we better load up because it's about to go off. And you can imagine that in the most critical spot leading into the busy part of World War II, America had to focus on this, so they hired 2 separate medical teams to figure out what's wrong with the Chamorro so that the Chamorro wouldn't rebel and go nuts and kick out the US Army from Guam. Good so far? Mystery disease, young men in particular, leading cause of death, critical military importance on Guam. Yeah?
So they didn't leave, they kind of just like tried to help?
Well, I don't know how you, different people tell history different ways. I think it's probably safe to say that because of the strategic importance, the United States had to invest
Well, yeah, it was for
in
like
this investigation.
personal reasons.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. And so,
Shit, I'm going home.
that's nice. And so, it turns out,
Did you say ale?
Yeah.
it turns out that it all comes down to these. Anybody know what these are?
Bats.
What kind?
Cute.
Fruit bats.
What kind?
Cute.
Pork bats.
Black one.
Pig bats.
Fruit.
Flying
Vampire.
fox.
What?
Flying fox?
Flying foxes, that's right.
Look at their little necks.
How do you just
Because of their furry neck.
It has this little red.
Back to me, back to me, back to me.
Those two
Flying,
sound shady, like curling them.
flying fox are giant, they eat souls. You may have seen them in the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yes.
Have you ever been to
Yep.
Western Australia? They are common in northwestern Australia. They're found on many Polynesian islands. On different places, they eat different food. I had a friend named Sam who was a zoologist doing his PhD in Australia. And he had a flying fox that was kind of a pet. He had nursed it back from health because it got hit by a car. And as soon as it could fly, he would open his windows at night, and so he knew that it was healthy when it would fly out at night to go feed. And at least once a week, when it would fly back in the morning, it would fly into his ceiling fan and get slammed down onto the bed and wake him up, and he'd be like arm wrestling a flying fox that had just bounced off the ceiling fan. They're dumb as F.
How big are they?
They have a wingspan that in some species pushes 6 feet.
Oh shit.
So that is like a large animal.
Yes.
Oh,
Really?
They look like that. They're like beefy. And by the way, they're the largest native mammal on Guam,
They taste good.
and so apparently they do.
So you want to barbecue those?
No. This line of reasoning was obvious to Dr. Lidico and Dr. Bodig. They noticed that you used to eat pork, but now you're selling it to the soldiers, so you're eating a lot of bats, right? And who eats the most at any barbecue?
Yeah,
Between 55 and 40.
How many of you are aware that men 25 to 40 will out-eat anybody else at a barbecue, especially on the meat stuff?
My teenage brother out eats that.
Jahari's not even 25 and he is.
Scary. It's only 19.
And like, okay, great, so you're eating a lot of bats, but so what? The bats
Oh.
eat fruit. They're fruit bats. Different islands, the bats eat a different fruit. So on your island, they might eat guavas, and on your island, they might eat mangoes, and on your island, they might eat strawberries. But on Guam, they eat the fruit of a really old tree called a cycad. It's a very slow growing tree. Raise your hand if you know cycads. Cycads make fruit in part of the year, but if it's the equator, they make fruit year round. You understand that equatorial islands don't have seasons? So the fruit's year round? Yeah? Everybody got that? No seasons? Equator? We talked about this? Notice how it all builds up, right? We said this earlier in the year? Okay. So that tree's probably 600 years old. 600 years is a really long time. And the bats can just come on by and eat the fresh fruit today, go back and sleep in somebody's closet, fly out the next evening and go eat some more fruits at night. They'll visit their favorite trees, sample the fruit until it's just right, pluck the fruit, eat all the meat off, spit out the seed, and repeat. They eat like 200 fruit a day. And you should know this whole entire story within 1 minute. Watch. The trees have a symbiosis with a bacteria that's toxic. This is the toxin of the tree bacteria. It's called BMAA, bimethyl something acid. You don't need to speak chemistry. I'll just tell you that's toxic.
What?
What's the punchline of my story?
Bats eat toxic stuff, not toxic to bats. People.
But why would they absorb something toxic?
Because it doesn't affect them.
Doesn't it though?
Or maybe it affects them and that's why are easier to catch.
Is it like it builds up in the bats and then we eat the bats and it builds up in the people and that's why it kills the people?
Why would it build up?
Because you eat more of the
Bioaccumulation.
bats.
Because
Because
the
it's
bats
like,
do
like-
toxic
it's like the
cleansing.
mercury poisoning thing.
They eat 200 a day.
Isn't it basically like the superbug thing?
They
Because
go
the
over
bats'
the amount of
immunity,
toxins.
they don't
Oh,
put
we're
up against
passing the
it.
threshold or something.
The whole like ambient thing, or like if you have enough of a toxin, then it becomes like bad.
Raise your hand if we did methylation last week. You were supposed to ask me about the vocab. What is methylation?
We
She
asked
didn't
you
do it.
about
They didn't say
methylation,
it
you
fast.
didn't
You just said
answer.
okay.
You're supposed to ask me twice.
When?
It'd be like before class, we weren't even doing class and you mentioned it?
Glad you got that
right at the
part on
start of
video.
class. You went out, you came back, and I was like, hey.
We need to do methylation.
And you're like, okay.
And then I said any more vocab and you were like, I asked more written stuff.
It wasn't the vocab.
It wasn't the
was
vocab,
warm-up.
it was a warm up.
It's a warm up and a vocab.
Boom!
We already wrote down the definition.
Get ready for a whole bunch of science that matters now. No, within a few minutes, this is going to be one of the more interesting stories you learn in Apes all year. I'm telling you, just bear with me. Watch me. That's a methyl group. Methane is CH4, but when you remove one of the hydrogens, you leave a bonding site. Methyl group is CH3 that still has a bonding site. Raise your hand if you've had some chemistry. Okay. Wait. Don't write anything. Look at my hand. Carbon, 4 hydrogens. Carbon has 4 hydrogen bonding sites, and so that's a pretty happy carbon because it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 hydrogens on it. Methane, CH4, 4 hydrogens. But if you take away one of those hydrogens, that's going to be a bonding site. The methyl group can stick to something. Does that make sense to everybody? Methyl groups are sticky. You probably want to put that in your notes. Methyl groups are sticky. They have a bonding site. Next. What happens if you eat this much mercury?
You die.
Do you though?
No.
You'll feel bad.
How many people say yes, if you eat this much mercury, you will die?
It depends.
No,
If
it's
you eat all
literally
at once.
just
What does it depend on?
Like,
how much mercury is
The
already in your
concentration
body.
of it all.
No, there's pure 100% elemental mercury. That's a lot of mercury.
Oh, you're not.
Mercury's very heavy, by the way. This would be like 15 pounds.
I'm sure you don't.
If you ate this much pure 100% perfectly elemental mercury, nothing would happen.
It's not toxic.
It would bumble through your digestive system, and the cells of your digestive system would be like, and then it would go clink, and it would drop in the toilet.
That was a very heavy ball.
Yeah.
But if it's bonded to carbon, then your cells will bring it into your body and then it'll kill you.
That's correct, Amunda, because mercury doesn't look useful, and your cells are stupid. They're like evolved in a really simple environment. your cells don't really avoid mercury because your cells have never really evolved in the presence of mercury. In the environment where your cells evolved, mercury was an extremely rare trace metal. So in the environment where your cells evolved, mercury is almost entirely absent. They don't know to look out or anything. They're just like, doop, 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 and they just like watch stuff go by. Like most of the burrito that I ate yesterday, my digestive system was like roughage, 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 and I dropped all that. In that burrito, my cells found a few useful things like sugars and carbs, and my cells were like, oh yes, carbon, and they absorbed all of that. Well, if your mercury is methylated, this compound is called methylmercury. Methylation is when you stick on a methyl group. Yes, that's right. You should write that down. Methylation is when you stick on a methyl group.
Wait, did you say that was methyl mercury or the other way around?
Yeah, it goes backward. Methylmercury.
Sorry.
It's not mercury methyl. Now, when you've methylated the mercury, your cells are like, oh yeah, carbon, sweet. And they'll absorb that. Now, all the sugars and carbs that I got out of my burrito yesterday, I've already spent that. At your house. With, I already used all the energy in those carbon bonds. All those sugars and carbs, my cells went chop, 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 and they broke all the carbon bonds, and all that energy's been used up. I've done things with it.
I have 2 dads.
Love is love, man.
Damn, you're rad, bro.
But this that's more embarrassing for you than for me. Like, that's really I'm down with 2 dads.
He doesn't even have 2 dads. He's lying, dude.
I know, that's what I'm saying, that it made him red to make a joke about having 2 dads instead of loving 2 dads. Okay. Okay. When things are methylated, your cells absorb them by accident, even if it's not useful. Like, that toxic ingredient in the cyanobacteria that are symbiotic with the trees. The trees absorb it because it looks useful. It's got carbon. The trees are stupid too. The trees are like, wee, sugar. And what do trees do with the sugar? They put all the sugar in the
Xylem.
fruit. So that other animals will spread the seeds for them. That's why the fruit tastes good. Yeah? So the cyanobacteria make this poison so that nothing will eat them. And that bacteria is symbiotic with the trees. The trees feed sugar into the ground so that the bacteria will stay on the roots. And that way, nothing will eat the roots of the tree. So the tree can have a long life, 600 years, right? And then those bacteria, they just exude that carbon stuff, and the trees are like, dirt, 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 looks useful, and the tree puts that all in the fruit. The bats are like, dirt, 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 looks useful. But do they use it?
No.
Because they don't have a system to digest this. It like goes into the bank and it's just like living in the bats. Anybody know a hoarder? Name something weird that you know somebody who hoards, yes?
She has like a carousel in front of her house.
And what does she hoard?
A carousel.
I want to know something specific.
My grandma hoards crafting
They're old
supplies.
neighbor.
Who?
My
It was,
grandma.
her name is Dolls. Oh,
There's
she's Dolls
crafting
everywhere.
Crafting supplies? Yeah, that's it.
My neighbor that just died, like he kept every single bit of trash that he had, and like every single bit of scrap metal and oil, like just anything that he ever used was sitting in his yard.
Now we're talking. Why do you think people do that?
Because it's easy.
They think it's valuable, but it's not.
They have
Because it's
problems
easy.
with separating with it.
And they're lazy.
They think they'll need it.
I can use that one day. That's what we think. It's like, oh, I've got 3 trash bags full of bottle caps. I'm gonna do something with them, I swear. You think it's gonna be useful, but it's not actually useful. Hoarding? You think it's gonna be useful metabolically, but it's not? Your cells pick through the food. Your cells pick through the food to find what's useful. Most of it is sugars and carbs and stuff. You need that to do things. But if it's not useful, it just accumulates. Imagine if you're a hoarder who gets to visit the home of other hoarders. And you're like, oh, these bags, awesome. These look really useful. Then you pile all those up and they're not. Imagine what your house would look like. Prepare for glory. Where are the squares going? My friend made it. Where are the squares going? Why do you not see the squares anymore? Why are the squares
The
disappearing?
squares are the good stuff, so that the body's absorbing it.
The squares are the good stuff that the body's absorbing and using. Do we all agree with that?
Is this movie notes?
But what are the round things?
Unhelpful.
Things that you don't need.
Things you don't need. You keep it by mistake.
It's just the same thing.
Yeah, it's gonna loop 4 times. This is the third. This is the third.
What was there, guys?
Look how unhappy that
I know, that's for sure when you want to die. Also, like that inside.
They're slippery.
So,
They're felt.
This is called bioaccumulation. All of this for one vocab term. Bioaccumulation is when living things absorb stuff by accident. They think it's useful, but it's not actually useful. Bioaccumulation. These are on point though. The laces up, they're hell on point.
Now the tongue was like in between the foot and the shoe, so I had to fix it.
And then just take it in.
Children,
Is there like tongue on your feet?
I need you to take your wallets out.
Joe.
I was told not to do this.
So,
Take out your wallets. Take out your wallets. Take out your wallets.
Joke's on you, I don't know how many money.
And now, I'm talking. This is a thing.
Oh, Brandon, tell.
This is a thing. Now, make sure that your wallet doesn't have anything criminally incriminating. I'm not going to judge you, just check for crimes.
That's
Now, I gotta tell you a sad story. I don't know if you've heard about this, but teachers don't really make a lot of money. Have you heard this?
It's too ready to ask.
Go buy yourself.
No, thanks for having your wallets out. We teachers don't make a lot of money. But I don't know if you've noticed, most teachers seem to have expensive hobbies and really expensive bad habits. So like, I eat really well. I drink premium beverages only.
Natty Light.
nothing but the best. I have a bow. One of my colleagues has like 3 classic cars. Don't you wonder, like, how are you a homeowner in Santa Barbara with a boat on a teacher's salary?
You steal
Flipping
your
truck bombs.
children's wallets.
There won't be enough.
What you may not know,
You invest it.
is that me and most of my colleagues like me, we're pickpockets. I didn't really know how I was going to tell this to you. I've been picking the pockets of my scumbag students for all the 17 years that I'm afraid, all the 17 years that I've been a teacher. I'm an expert in high school kid wallets.
Go buy yourself something nice.
Whips out a sword.
You know, I've got bad habits to feed.
Is that a Lego?
I can't,
Oh my god.
I can't really keep up with my drinking habit, my drug habit,
Addiction.
my hobby with the ladies.
Take his license.
I have a fishing license. That's very good. I'm happy to see that. Thank you for carrying me.
Thank you for doing
I need a credit card for an example. You have a credit card
Mine has
or an
one.
ATM card?
Think so?
This wallet's really difficult to use, man. You gotta spend some of this cash on the wallet, homie.
What cash?
Bro!
Jose the tan one.
Just
has
need
one.
it.
Do you need it?
So I gotta remember to get the money back. Aha! Perfect. And once I've taken everything which I think is useful, you'll have to reorganize. Sorry.
Put the cash.
What about what cash? Cash.
Do you actually, is this cash still in your pocket?
Is this the, it's,
That makes me so uncomfortable.
These kids are straight up rolling. No joke, my wallet has $0 right now. That is actually true. Thank God for Santa Barbara teenagers. This is sweet ass.
You should have taken Matt's wallet.
That's all it is. Just take it, just trash.
Really?
Oh, rip.
well, because he's a pizza delivery guy.
Yeah, he gets paid in cash every day.
Like, the wallet's this big.
What are they all ones?
They're literally insane.
Yo, is that duct
Okay,
tape?
but at least they're like
So shut up, you didn't even have one.
Did you have my
Okay,
CCI
right.
get free bus rides?
What is that?
Stop tape!
That's like Kate's wallet. I
Chill.
can't.
And having a social security.
Hey,
Why did I give it to
I need one.
That is literally the most British looking wallet I've ever
British? Shut up.
Okay.
You don't know about my head.
Okay. So, through the course of the day,
Class dismissed.
yeah, see ya. Through the course of the day, when my children drop a wallet, when they go to the bathroom, or when they forget their jacket, I'll be like, oh yeah, you forgot your jacket. And I'm able to feed my bad habits. So I can go to the liquor store and say, hi, I'd like that bottle of premium whiskey, please. And then like, can I put another bottle on my debit card? And they're like, yeah, you just need your PIN number. And I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote that in my car, I'll get it back. And then I go to like the taco joint and be like, yo, I gotta get like a big ass fatty tray of tacos. And like, can I get an horchata on my Visa card? And like, yeah, I just need to see your ID. And I'm like, oh, I forgot that on my bike. Be right back.
my bike.
And then I go to the liquor store and like, yo, can I get a refill for my vape pen, please? And like, oh, that vape is gold. Yeah, can I put that on my debit card? He's like, yeah, I just need the PIN number. And I'm like, yeah, hold on, I just gotta go get my motorcycle. And then I go find myself some warm, loving arms.
Right now.
I say, what about round 2? Do you take debit? And they go, only with ID. And I go, oh yeah, hold on, I just put my pants on. I'll be right back.
Now they're worried about ID.
Then at home, I'm like, someday I'm gonna figure out how to use these. Next day, I go back to school. And I pick more pockets. Why do you carry 48 pounds of pennies, bro?
I don't know.
Why
do you take his money?
Because I got bad habits, but all these pennies are your bad habits.
They're not all.
No, you
Yeah,
don't
I
need
need
to
those.
Oh, wait, can I use them?
Yeah. Wait, I don't have that.
We've decided to name your beard Melissa.
Can I take a picture of that, Jose?
Nope.
God.
That's hilarious.
I got it.
Can we get a pair of scissors?
Oh my God.
This looks like my cash.
Thank you. Oh my God, he took my AAA card.
Next day. Next day. I'm like, oh yeah, I need some gasoline for my car won't start. Well, can you tow me? And they're like, sure, Miss Ostobani, we just need your home address. I'm like, oh yeah, that's on my license. I'll just be right back. And then I go to the taco joint, get more tacos. And I'm like, oh, I can only afford one taco. Can I put those on my debit card? And they're like, yeah, sure. We just need your PIN number. I'm like, oh yeah, crap. And I go home.
I don't want that.
And you can see how
Yeah. Wait, I might.
you can see how, as a veteran of public education of 17 years, I might accumulate a lot of credit cards in that much time. Does that make sense to everybody? A lot of plastic that I can't use. Can you imagine how much plastic I would have? Right? 17 years? What happened to all the cash? Like most of the stuff that I ate in that burrito, I'm not growing by a burrito per day, because I'm usually either burning or crapping out the burrito. Right? No, you don't understand how it works. You eat burritos. Everybody poops. We're okay. Imagine that I go to a staff meeting. You know, my principal, she drives a Beamer, y'all.
Yeah, she makes like 200K.
Nah, she doesn't make that much at all. She just bought a house, did like a really nice bathroom remodel, like super classy remodel.
You sure you want
Yeah,
to
why
be
do you
filming
know?
for this part?
You might wonder, Dr. Simmons, how do you?
Because she's a doctor, you're not.
How do you
I
pay for your Beamer new house and remodel in the same year?
Tax evasion.
Atomic campus lunch.
She has staff meetings.
She knows the PIN numbers.
She's gonna steal Jose's wallet. Then she's gonna steal Jamie Davis's wallet. Then she's gonna steal Mr. Tormey's wallet.
I was just in the States.
Miss Nye's money.
Miss Nye's money pouch.
Mr. Jackson's Cybertruck.
Oh my
Mr. Jackson's chest full of gold bars.
And so,
I keep all my money solid.
less distracting, please. I think you could imagine how, if we teachers accumulated student cards, the principal could accumulate teacher cards, but she would probably get a lot more in one day, right? If she stole my wallet today, she'd get this many. And then if she steals Barnett, Carmian, Davis, for me, the principal's gonna take like this many cards that she's not using. When she goes to an all principals meeting, district, the superintendent is gonna take all of hers out of the wallet, all of Lito's from Santa Barbara Junior High, all of that new lady from San Marcos. Can you imagine the superintendent?
Rich.
Look at that big fish.
It's so pretty. So many nice dogs.
Yeah, but imagine if you ate the big fish. And then you ate another big fish tomorrow.
No, repeat. Okay, we're gonna watch it again.
I just gotta see it.
Oh no.
I'll go on.
They just speed it up.
It goes faster and faster every time.
Okay. Would it ever happen, I don't know, let's just say there's like a bunch of students and they had to go to Miss Simmons' office and then they leave their coats. Would she ever take students' wallets or would she only take wallets from like one tier below?
She might, and then you could also eat the sardine that the tuna would have eaten. But there's a reason why I've done this, and I'm almost out of minutes, but I still haven't made my punchline. I really got to rush now. I only got like 7 minutes, and this is actually really useful, I think. If you're looking at the numbers, each bacterium has a teeny bit of the toxin. The tree accumulates more of the toxin and puts it all into the fruit. Each bat eats nothing but fruit for its whole life. When adult men crush all the bats at the barbecue every night, eating multiple bats per dude, the toxicity starts to reach a toxic threshold sometime between the age of 25 and 40. Does that make sense? Start to be weighed down by that toxin, which you're keeping but you're not using. There's two words at play in this story, and I've spent an hour because if you start looking around, it applies all over the place. Watch. Bioaccumulation is a cellular process where your cells keep the wrong stuff by accident because they're stupid. Especially if it's methylated, as a good example. Your cells will keep it. That's a single cellular process. My cells do this and yours too. You don't actually absorb mercury. If mercury passes through your bloodstream, mercury is inert and useless, and your cells just go, there it goes. But if that mercury is methylated, your cells are like, oh, and they just see the carbon. I wasn't really thinking about how I was going to use all my students' credit cards. I just saw, that's got to be money. I'm not very smart, neither are your cells. Accumulation is a cellular process of keeping stuff that is useless by accident. Magnification. Is how the concentration increases as you go up the food chain. What gets magnified, what becomes bigger, is the concentration as you go up the food chain. Remember Silent Spring with the DDT that was being sprayed on the crops, and then the DDT would wash off the crops down the river into the stuff that made it up into the eagles that would sit on their eggs, and they'd have squishy eggs over at Santa Cruz Island. How many of you have heard that story, kind of?
Multiple times in this class.
Now please look up, there's the numbers. This was Rachel Carson's book. She was like, DDT in our environment is really low. DDT has carbon, by the way, because it's a persistent organic pollutant. It's a pesticide built on a carbon molecule. So plants are like, ooh, carbon, and it's not useful to them. They just absorb the DDT because they're stupid. And then the little bugs, they eat the plants, and all their cells are like, huh, that's a lot of carbon, must be useful, but it doesn't help them. They just eat plants all day. And then the big fish eat the little fish all the time, and they always go, oh, that looks useful. Until, in the case of DDT, it only reaches a negative consequence. It only goes across that threshold of toxicity when you eat a whole bunch of big fish. Why do they tell pregnant women that they can't eat tuna? How many of you are aware that tuna is a big fish? How many of you are aware that it's a predator? Do you remember how a bear needs a lot of mice that eat a bunch of crickets that feed on a lot of forest? You all remember that? Now watch this. It takes many square miles of algae to feed the plankton that are eaten by the little fish, that are eaten by the medium fish, that are eaten by the large fish, that are eaten by a single tuna. And a tuna lives maybe 60 years before it's eaten by meat. I think 60 years is the sweet spot for eating tuna. So think about it. When I eat tuna, please look up. That's like an ocean surface area of 4 square miles, soaking up whatever falls on that for a total of 60 years. And the only thing that's being stored in the tuna is not the energy. The tuna uses the energy. It's not the protein. The tuna is a relatively small amount of the leftover protein. Does that make sense to everybody? The one thing that stores in the tuna is all that mercury that fell out of all those fossil fuels whenever we burn coal or gasoline. That's all stored. So when I eat tuna 20 times a year, that's going to grow in me, right? If I was raising a fetus, I would put all the good stuff in the fetus, and so that little tiny body would get all that tuna mercury, and that would be dangerous. I'm afraid when we make tuna. Interesting?
Yes, very.
Goodbye.
Jose.
Yeah.